Okay, so to the question of what's the most commonly played drum in Africa, that's a very interesting question because historically there were probably more than 1,000 different specific kind of drums. To a lot of uninitiated observers, you would say, well, those are the same, but they have very specific differences in the types of wood being used, types of skin, types of tension, right? There's peg tension, rope tension, glue tension. So, for most of history, there wasn't one that was used more than any other because things were so regional, right? It's like any part of the world before it got McDonald'sified, people actually had regional differences. So the variety is pretty astounding. However, in the past 50 years, the djembe, actually the instrument that we have here at Buff State, has sort of become almost standardized. I mean, you'll see it in places where 100 years ago it wasn't even on the radar screen. So it is actually becoming sort of the generic drum for Africa. For example, when I go to Ghana, the djembe was not their traditional instrument. Their traditional instruments have peg tuning and they're played with either one stick in one hand or two sticks, whereas the djembe has ring tuning and is played with two hands. Totally different sound. But nowadays, if you go to Ghana, they have djembes, and it's kind of because they discovered that's what the tourists wanted, and so it's sort of like had an economic impact. But plus the musicians enjoy the sound because it's very loud and very high compared to their mellow drums. So yeah, it's really becoming the djembe. Okay, so talking about where performers perform in Africa, there's actually quite a disparity depending on whether you're in a rural area or an urban area. So many of the countries have concert halls in their capital cities, right? And which is also somewhat connected to colonial influences, right? Like during colonial times, which was roughly 1880 to 1960, there are many, most of the capital cities in Africa have this sort of colonial vibe to them. So, a grid pattern, an auditorium, play the opera house or whatever. So sometimes music is played in that kind of a venue. Usually that's the music that gets patronage of the government. So the national ensemble, like in Ghana, there's a national dance ensemble, which is sort of, it's their full-time job to rehearse and perform, and that would be drummers and dancers, singers, and other instruments. Usually, though, the venues are sort of the town square, because most people, by numbers, still live in small villages. So usually the performance is really more of an interactive celebration, right? I mean, definitely there are people who specialize in drums, who play better than anyone else, but there's usually a role to be played by the listeners as well. So there's generally a big flat-ish area in the center of the village. Usually there's a very large tree for shelter, and performances take place there, although they tend to be more, I don't know if people would even think of them that way, more of a, people are performing, but it's much more open-ended, like when will it start, when will it end, who knows, it depends on what they're feeling. And people start and stop playing throughout, rather than it being like, okay, 2 sets. This guy gets tired, so he goes, and his nephew takes over, right? So it's much more flexible. Okay. So thinking about why groups of musicians played drums and how it started, it has a lot to do with, first of all, like any culture, pre-electricity, people did a lot of things. You know what I mean? We knew how to make stuff. We spent our time very, very actively. And making music together was always a really important part of reinforcing the group dynamic, instilling lessons, right? There's a lot of rhythms that specifically accompany rites of passage, different stages in your life, the things you need to be doing and knowing. It's also used for like work music to coordinate group tasks and make it more enjoyable. So really it's completely intertwined with every aspect of culture, of everyday life. In traditional life, you are in an age set, right? So like you have a group of people who are your same age, maybe born within 3 or 4 years, right? And you do everything together. So playing music together is a part of that, because it's like this literal way of doing something where you need each other, right? Literally. If you play the wrong pattern, it's off, right? It's ruined, or it's different. So it's a manifestation of cooperation, but it's also joyful, right, and celebratory and coming together, and which is also understood as necessary in traditional culture, right? I mean, we need to feel good together, right? And drumming is a very tangible part of that. Yeah. Okay. This is the Mbira Zavadzimu. Mbira is an umbrella term for lots of thumb pianos. Zavadzimu means of the ancestral spirits. So this particular one tends to have 3 octaves tuned to like a white note scale. So you've got your lower octave, middle octave, and then higher octave, with a couple of extra notes. So what you'll notice when I play it like that is they're not in a scalar order, which is really fascinating to me, and it makes it really hard. The way the notes work, this is the main octave that you use, and then you embellish with lower notes and higher notes. Each piece of metal is a slightly different size, so that's how you get your different pitches. It's attached to a soundboard with this sort of bridge, right? There's a metal underneath holding the lamella up, and then there's this one holding them down. So when you pluck them, they're free to vibrate. And it's literally called a thumb piano because you play almost all the notes just with your thumbs. And then when you get good, which I'm not good yet, you also play some of the notes with your pointer finger, but it's almost completely thumbs. Okay? So sounding board, lamella, and bridge. This instrument has these little pieces of metal so that you hear a little bit of a buzz. And that's really important to the sound. They don't want a pure tone, they want a buzz. And in Zimbabwe, they're always played inside a calabash with a bunch of additional buzzing pieces of metal. So it's actually supposed to be very buzzy. All right. This is a piece called Kariga Mombe, shown to people in Zimbabwe. Variation. One more variation.